We're here today on the Capitol grounds in Raleigh, North Carolina's state capital. And walking the grounds of this beautiful oak-strewn lawn, you can see a number of monuments. And this is where we come to remember our veterans and those who have sacrificed so much in wars around the globe. For as long as North Carolina has been a state, we try to remember those who've sacrificed so much for North Carolina and the nation. My name is Ernest Dollar, and I'm the director of the City of Raleigh Museum. And today we're going to talk about one man's story, one man's sacrifice, all through one single artifact in the museum's collections. So come with me and discover the story of Lieutenant William Oliver Smith. This impressive monument was one of the first on the Capitol grounds to commemorate the dead. This is the Civil War monument, dedicated to the almost 40,000 North Carolinians who died during the Civil War. The next conflict to be commemorated and memorialized here on the Capitol grounds is this one. It is dedicated to Worth Bagley, who was killed in the Spanish-American War in 1898. He was a naval officer killed off Cuba, and this sort of represents all of those soldiers who fell in that conflict. Just a decade after the end of the Vietnam War, North Carolina erected this monument to memorialize its war dead in that conflict. This is the monument to North Carolinians who served in the other 20th century wars, World War I, World War II, and Korea. It's a beautiful monument. It's got flags of each branch of service. It's got this beautiful bronze eternal flame, which encourages us to remember forever their sacrifices. But on the Capitol grounds is one tiny little hidden monument, which is critical to our story today, that invites each of us to remember the sacrifices of one division of Tar Heels on battlefields far, far away. So in a far off corner of the Capitol grounds is where this monument is, and if you blink, you'll miss it. It's on one of Raleigh's busiest streets, and thousands of people pass by it every day and probably never pay attention to the monument dedicated to the memory of the 81st Division in the World War I. From North Carolina, they were called the Wildcats, and it's here where our story begins. So looking at this piece, I'm not quite sure what it is. It's a military piece because it's got crossed guns on it and perhaps a regimental numbers on it. I'm not sure quite what it is. And the only clue that we've got what this is what's written on the paper bag wrapper it came in. And it simply says, picked up at a place called Haudiomont, H-A-U-D-I-O-M-O-N-T, it looks like, when Oliver was captured. So certainly this is a military piece, not quite sure from which war, or who Oliver is, or Haudiomont is. So it sounds French, but you never know. So the first place we want to go is to the computer and just punch in exactly what it says here, and hopefully that will give us a clue. Oh, here we go. So incredibly, by just looking up Haudiomont, Oliver, and capture, we've discovered exactly who owned this piece and what happened in the story behind it. It turns out that this little piece of canvas, whatever it is, was picked up when Lieutenant William O. Smith from Raleigh was captured in World War I at a place called Haudiomont, France. Now, through the North Carolina State Archives, incredibly, they have put the entire story of William O. Smith online, and it gives incredible first-hand accounts of what happened, the award that William O. Smith won, the Croix de Guerre from the French government, and gives us his entire story. So next, we need to find out more about William O. Smith and his connection to Raleigh. And then the question still remains, what is this little piece of canvas? And why did someone pick it up and bring it home, and the day before the war ends, and about William O. Smith's capture. Well, thanks for coming in, Sergeant Spencer, and we've got a great collection of stuff that I need your help in telling us what we have. So the first mystery object we've got is this tiny, ugly piece of canvas. And so we found this in the museum's collection, and all it says on the front, it says, picked up at Haudiomont, where Oliver was captured.
At first I thought it was one of their 1917 packs, but because of the shape of it, it couldn't be that. I believe it's a 1908 haversack, model 1908 haversack, and because the stitching right here where there would have been a seam on the interior with a pocket makes it a great match for that. The 324th would have been the regiment, and the cross arms, the rifles would have been the infantry, which is what the I stands for, and the B would be for Bravo Company or Baker Company back then. So
most every soldier in World War I on the American side were issued these kind of haversacks.
Right.
How often do you guys see souvenirs of this type come into your collection?
Not common at all. Usually it's just generic type things like a canteen, just has the U.S. mark on it, or something else like that that just has the maker's marks. But to see something personalized with this that lines it up with a specific unit is very important. Those things generally didn't make it back to the States, and if they did, they wound up in somebody's attic and just rotted away.
So through our research, we've discovered that this soldier who had this was Lieutenant William O. Smith. And so talking to the family, they've given us a great collection of images from Lieutenant Smith's wartime experience. And this looks like it was from Camp Jackson, which is now Fort Jackson in Columbia, South Carolina. So could you look at these images and kind of give us an idea of what Lieutenant Smith's training would have been in South Carolina?
Judging from the photograph here, it looks like these are primarily officers, and this is very similar to a yard long, but a little bit shorter. And this would have been their typical officers for the battalion, with training with the water-cooled Browning machine gun. Because there's a British officer in here, he would have been the advisor to them. I imagine he had seen combat, because they wouldn't have sent somebody over to train a new unit getting ready to deploy without any knowledge of what these guys could expect. The French didn't put a lot of stock into machine guns, and the Germans did. The French felt that the machine guns wasted too much ammo, but that didn't serve them very well. The uniforms here, they've got they're wearing the summer uniform that the guys that went down the Pershing's expedition down to Mexico. That's what they would have typically worn, just the shirts and the campaign hats. Later on, once they went overseas, the campaign hats would have changed into the overseas hats, or the garrison caps, which were much more easy to pack and maintain a more soldierly appearance. These are just some fantastic photographs, and the amazing thing about the photography of that day is you can, as I was doing earlier, you can take a magnifying glass to it and make out what exactly the pins are on them, or the ribbons. The detail is just absolutely phenomenal. I just love looking at these photographs, because it literally is a time capsule in each one.
So one of these signs says it's the 81st Division Machine Gun School. Do you know idea when the school started up and how long the men would sort of rotate to the school before they went overseas?
Well, once the unit was established in August of 1917, they would have immediately opened up, they would have assigned the units. Each division would have had 3 brigades, an artillery brigade and 2 infantry brigades with a machine gun battalion with it. The train-up would have begun immediately. There was no time to waste, and these guys, while they didn't get as much training as they should have, their casualty figures show that, over 1,000 wounded or died of wounds. They had to start immediately, and the schools would have gone on until the War Department decided they were ready to go, and they were shipped out to England and then over to the continent.
This is a loan we have to the museum, but we thought this would be a great way to illustrate what Lieutenant Smith would have been wearing in France in 1918. So could you tell us a little bit about this uniform and its relation to Lieutenant Smith and his regiment?
Well, this is the 1917 pattern uniform, wool, choker collar. The other thing about this is on the left sleeve, this is absolutely amazing. Embroidered, hand-sewn to the jacket, 81st Division patch. The 81st Division was the first unit. They were credited with establishing shoulder sleeve insignia. Really just something that the commanding general wanted to do for recognition of his troops and being able to establish command and control. And it turned out that somebody kind of tattled on him when they saw it at the port of embarkation, and he argued that, you know, he had already informed the War Department, and by their acquiescence, he figured it was approved. It turned out to be ironic that the War Department was already thinking of doing something like that, and this was approved in October of 1918. So all the units were directed to create something like this, and this is the Wildcat, which is supposed to have been indigenous to North Carolina, although I haven't seen any around. The 81st was also unique in that they did different colors variations based on the branch that they were in: artillery, infantry, sanitary train, that kind of thing like that.
What made World War I combat so unlike anything that anybody had ever seen?
It was more of a fixed battle. You're talking about trenches, long, miles and miles of trenches, in absolutely horrendous conditions. There's no drainage. The water would collect in the ditches, there'd be rats. It was just a disgusting way of life back then. And really the only relief was to get wounded and sent back to the rear. Going over the top, which is what they said when they were going out of the trenches to attack, all the fields, there was no vegetation. It had all been blown away and destroyed, and there was craters pockmarked everywhere. No body armor like we wear today. The Germans had machine guns pinning down everybody. They knew exactly where things were and where to expect attacks. They had some very good, not only intelligence, but also ability to figure out likely avenues of attack. The frontline soldier had just a miserable existence, from lice to constant bombardments and gas attacks to just living in mud and filth. There's only so much you can do to mitigate those circumstances.
Looking at the archival record, one letter stands out. A soldier, M.J. Harrigan, who was with Smith, wrote to North Carolina in 1919 to tell the North Carolina Historical Commission exactly what Smith had done during the war. Harrigan remembered that on that November 9th morning, his unit moved out. Smith and the men of his 318th Machine Gun Battalion were escorting the other sister unit of the 324th Infantry as they moved forward from the city of Haudiomont. They carefully cut their way through the German defenses and through the wire and made their way into the thick forest beyond the city. Around 3 p.m., Smith and his men discovered a German machine gun bunker. They surrounded the emplacement and implored the Germans to surrender. Smith and his men fought on and captured the bunker, occupying it on the night of November 9th. They had moved far in advance of the other American forces and were stranded between the lines. The next morning, November 10th, at 4:30 a.m., Harrigan said, "The fun started. They came at us from all directions." Smith's men began to fall wounded. One of his 4 guns was knocked out, and then another, and then finally, down to one single gun, Smith leapt up, manned the trenches, and began firing the gun himself. The infantry officers with him ordered every man for himself. Smith and his machine gunners covered their retreat and allowed 40 American soldiers to escape. But as they fired, their ammunition ran low. Hand grenades kept flying into the bunker and exploding, and one of these gave Smith his first wound. It would be one of 5 for the entire day. Finally, Smith came to the realization that the only thing left to do was to surrender. So above the firing, he called out to the German officers and offered to surrender. But soon German officers came in and allowed Smith and the others to come out. When ordered to raise his hand to surrender, Smith refused. Smith and others were taken behind the lines and bandaged up and sent to prison camps in Germany. But they wouldn't stay there long because the next day was the armistice that ended the fighting in Europe. While recuperating, Smith wrote home to his family in Raleigh. He modestly said, "Well, you know, I didn't do any more than anyone else would have done." William O. Smith returned to Raleigh wearing the Distinguished Service Cross and the Croix de Guerre, one of France's most important and illustrious medals that it awarded to soldiers during the war. In the possession of his family, they still value the medals that he won on that fateful battlefield almost a century ago. The story of William Oliver Smith is incredible. From this one object picked up on a battlefield in France almost a century ago, to the rich archival collections, these letters and diaries that tell us exactly what happened to him there, and the stories of his family, and the photographs they share and still have and cherish his memory by. At the City of Raleigh Museum, this one object allows us to tell an experience of so many more men and women in war. How we remember. How do we choose to remember them, and how do they choose to remember their own experience? So for the City of Raleigh Museum, I'm Ernest Dollar, and I hope you'll come down and visit us and experience the history of Raleigh and all the men and women that helped make it great.